From the UFOs to the UAPs and all unidentified flying things in between. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Jason Burns.
And I'm Danny Nucci, and this is the What About podcast.
Ooh, I got to tell you, Danny, this episode was one of my favorites because I just eat up this science stuff to the point where I can't contain it in my brain anymore.
I'm just fascinated how all the images in books, I'm talking about like everywhere from Bradbury to Asimov to, just all the vision, Close Encounters, E.T., like just how all of that has colored the idea of alien life. And just talking to someone who can actually, synthesize it into understandable chunks is really cool. I mean, you read the book. I could have fronted like I read it, but I didn't want to do that. You read the book, right? And that was your experience with it.
It 100% was. And just how it's interesting because he talked about Carl Sagan and how Carl involved when teaching a lesson on science, bringing in history and literature and all these other things. And that is what this book does, and just pointing out the history of why we are where we are with aliens, and the whole idea that the flying saucer is just some misquote.
I love the flying. Okay,
don't
goodness. Say anything. Let the audience listen to it.
Yes.
Without further ado, very personable author of The Little Book of Aliens, astrophysicist Adam Frank. Can you believe the timing of you writing this book and what's happening in the zeitgeist of the world at this time? I mean, it must have, you must have been looking at this coming going, finally.
And the publisher must have been like, ka-ching, this is really working out.
Yeah, that was pretty much it. When we sent it in, because, I've been working in this for a long time. It's,
hence the question.
Idea of techno-signatures and life in the universe. But when I put in the proposal, one of the reasons the publisher was like, oh, this will be great. And that's why one of the reasons also I dealt with the UFOs and UAPs. So many people are interested in that, even though that's not my thing. I wanted people to understand from a scientific perspective, how to look at the UFOs and UAP stuff. Because,
I was going to ask you that, Adam, because you actually talk about a little bit about the congressional hearing stuff in there. Was that added in after the fact just because it was so timely?
No. From the beginning. The book took me about a year to write. I think so. We started, maybe New Year's of 2022. I actually started banging away. So all the astronomy stuff, the astro stuff, I got on the top of my head. I could just sit down and write that. I had to do a bunch of reading to understand sort of the history. I wanted to give people the history of UFOs, and I also wanted them to understand, like, with everything going on now with those hearings, like what part of that is hype, which is a lot, and which part, like, okay, might there be some science that, might lead us somewhere?
Well, I don't want to get us too dirty into the alien category right now. I want to start with a little bit about you because our special topic is aliens.
Yeah, you said it's not your thing. So I'm interested in what your thing is and then how it developed into this. And how did you get your thing?
Exactly.
All right. Well, first of all, my thing is astronomy and space, and when I say aliens, I just mean life in the universe. Like, are we alone? That question.
Not necessarily intelligent either, right? Could just be.
Any of it. That's part of one thing I'm saying in the book. It doesn't have to be intelligent for it to, change everything in terms of our understanding. But I grew up in Jersey, like right across the river from New York. And, even as a kid, I was just like super into astronomy. And the thing about
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Adam.
Already, he just started. He just got out of Jersey, and you're already interrupting
because he haven't even been able to see a lot of stars in the Jersey sky.
Yeah, right? That was one of the funny things. Right. There's 5 stars. When you're growing up in Jersey, in New York. It's like, how long can that take? Then I'll do something else. I'll be a baseball player. I don't know. Then it turns out. Then you get out to Colorado, and you're like, holy crap! There's 1 million of them. This is going to take forever. That was the end of my, my pitching career right there. So I got my dad was a science fiction fan, and so he had these pulp science fiction magazines in his library. And I remember, like, literally, I'm 5 years old. I go down there, I'm looking at these like lurid images of guys bounce around the moon, half naked women, being chased around. That was what those covers were about.
Barbarella, yeah.
Barbarella, exactly. Barbarella. And then aliens and, bug-eyed monsters. And like, that was it for me. I just knew I wanted to do astronomy. And then my parents were divorced. My dad lived in the city. And he would take me to the Hayden Planetarium all the time. And so that is what really...
Sure.
But the important part of Jersey in this story is that, Jersey, what you learn in Jersey is that everybody's got to hustle. Everybody's got some story that they're trying to make some money off of you. And that's where like the skepticism that I come to when it comes to UFOs and UAPs. I had this really interesting experience where there was this book, Chariots of the Gods. I don't know if you guys remember it. It was like it was the book that started the whole ancient alien thing. And I read this book. I'm 11 years old. I read it. I'm like, oh my God, there's the pyramids were built by aliens.
Stonehenge, all that stuff, right? It was all...
Right, all that stuff. And so, I read the whole thing, like Easter Island, the one with those giants, that island with the giant stone heads. And Von Daniken's like, look, there's no trees on the island. How did they move this giant stone heads? It must have been aliens. 2 years later, on like Nova, Channel 13, there's this show that's like In Search of Ancient Aliens. And they basically just talked to like anthropologists. And they said, hey, how'd they move those stone heads? And then it turns out like, there used to be lots of trees on Easter Island. And they cut them all down to move the stone heads, And I remember this. I was so pissed. I was like, WTF, man. This guy wrote a book that was full of lies, and I was the mark. I was the sucker. And so that is what really, where that kind of like hard-edged skepticism of a scientist was born in me. From, we grew up in Jersey, you just learn that like, man, everybody's got a story and you got to be careful because they're going to try and like, use you as the mark.
Well, in those books, like that particular book was positioned as nonfiction. But for me, I grew up watching X-Files. And so I was the mark of fiction. You could go either way.
Right. Yeah. But at least there you kind of know it's fiction. Whereas like Von Daniken, as you said, that book was like, oh, we've discovered blah, blah, blah. And, that burned it for me. So like when it comes, that's why like with the UFO and UAP stuff, I'm a scientist. I'm super skeptical. I'm open-minded. Like, listen, it would be awesome if, like we were being visited by alien spaceships. And who knows, maybe that's possible. But like in general, most of the stuff I see is like, get out of here.
Which is a very Jersey response.
Get the fuck out of here. No fucking aliens over here. Get the fuck out. Motherfucking alien. So here's the question. So this is, you become passionate about it. I mean, are you watching movies at this point? You're a high school kid. You're going to go to college. When did this turn into a career?
Well,
I'm always interested in that because it's such an odd, that there's a desire and a passion and an interest. And then when you're actually able to turn it into what you actually do with your life most of the time, it's fascinating to me.
The hustle. How did you make it a hustle?
How did you make it a hustle?
That's right.
Right. How'd you make it the Adam Frank hustle?
Well, first of all, just about the movies. Like, I watched everything, right? Every possible... Up until like streaming happened, I'd seen every science fiction film ever made. And then I got overwhelmed once with streaming.
Favorites?
Favorite Star Trek for sure, right? The original series, because, it used to come on, this is the 70s, right? It was in rotation. So at 4:00 and at 7:00, they would, 2 different channels every day. So I watched every episode like 50 times. And then there was Space 1999, right? Which sucked, but, it was all there was. There was this one called UFO. There was a show called UFO.
I don't remember UFO.
Do you remember UFO?
I do not.
Oh, yeah, because it was weird. It was this little small show. It was British. It had these like purple-haired women on the moon. It was weird, and it was. But like again, all the science fiction back then sucked, right? There was what was it? Lost in Space, the original.
I was gonna say Lost in. Oh, the pain, oh, the pain.
The thing about Lost in Space, you could see how they had less money each season because by the end, the last 2 seasons, there were no walls. Like you'd be on a spaceship and it would be a bunch of furniture and a black studio. And even I, at like 8 years old, these were reruns, right? I'm like, what the fuck? Like, no, there's walls.
You're from Jersey, you're going, I don't buy this.
Right.
This is no good.
Yeah. So yeah, but I still would watch it because I didn't care. I was into it. So what happens is, I knew I wanted to be an astronomer from age 5. Never wanted to do anything else, right? As I get older, I'm reading Carl Sagan. I'm starting to learn, when I'm a teenager, I'm starting to learn about the actual like physics and astronomy. And luckily, I had some capacity at mathematics, right? I mean, as I'm learning trigonometry, it makes sense to me. It's a language. Like, oh, I can say things in this language. So then I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder. I wanted to get out of Jersey, right? As far away from Jersey as I could
and
get.
see the stars.
Yeah.
But you know what? Actually, what it was? It was John Denver. It was John Denver and his like 1977 Christmas in Colorado special, where he's in a giant terrarium. And you guys don't remember this.
No, not so fun fact. My friend Todd, who has been a friend most of my life, was in California and witnessed John Denver's plane crash. He was just sitting on a bench with a girl on the waterfront and saw it crash. Had no idea it was him at the time.
Right.
But
right.
I hate to get things all dark and dreary, but
Jesus, Jason.
I know, bringing it down, bro.
We were just about to hear how a John Denver special turned into a career for this man, and here you go.
Sorry.
So that's what got me out to Colorado.
Right. The John Denver special, you're like, I got to go to Colorado. That's where he is.
Right. And then I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, which was awesome.
Go Buffs.
Go Buffs.
Yes.
This was the early 80s, right? So this was, Boulder was where the hip met to trip. It was.
Sure. No, there's still remnants of it.
There,
It's still very much so.
Much the party school. And so, I was a physics and really a physics major. And, I just stretched myself thin because, I had some talent, but I didn't have as much talent as everybody else. So I just really busted my right, exactly. And that was the problem. All my friends went to the University of Colorado to ski and party, and I'm like the one guy there who's doing work. So I just, I was determined. Again, the hustle. I was determined that, like, no matter what, with what meager talent I had, I was gonna make it. And so, I just like gave everything to it. And then, then you go to graduate school and yada, yada, yada. But I was just so dedicated to it that there was nothing else I could do. Like, in my head, like there was nothing else. It was either this, ride or die. It was either this or nothing. And luckily it worked out.
So at what point did it become also educating and teaching others what you had learned and what you continue to learn?
That was Carl Sagan, right? I had read all of his books as a teenager. And the cool thing about Sagan was that, when he would he teach you something about science, about like relativity, but he would do it by like taking you to Renaissance Venice, and all of a sudden you're like learning about like, the political structure of Renaissance Venice. And that just got me interested in the idea of science as a cultural construct, about how science fit into art and history and literature. His writing was so beautiful and so poetic that it inspired me. And, it inspired me to like, I love science so much. I get such a, it just blows my mind so much. I want to share it with people because I think they should know. And also the world's a freaking mess. And I really think that if people had a better sense of just how amazing every day was, maybe they'd stop, killing each other a little bit, But
it does feel like we're also moving, at least some of mainstream America, further away from science as well at the same time.
Yeah. And I've really been part of that because a lot of that was climate. That got started with climate denial. And I was writing I had a blog that I was running for NPR from like 2008 to 2018. And we really watched the rise of organized climate denial. I'd write something because, I took a year and a half off between undergraduate and graduate. I was like a foot messenger in Manhattan. I was a bouncer. Look at me. I'm a bouncer. Bouncer at the Rocky Horror Picture Show on 8th Street,
Whoa.
The 8th Street Playhouse. Yeah, that was a trip.
Wow. Can you imagine sitting down waiting to go in talking to this guy for a while, Jason? Like,
yeah.
I'm sorry, what? You're what?
Nobody was
and then what? And the Cosmos do what?
The people dressed as Dr. Frankenhooker didn't know that they were going to be talking about stars that night.
Exactly. And nobody talked to me. My job was to clear out the bathrooms during the movie and be like, guys, come on. Oh, really? No, just come on, not in here.
What a journey from clearing out the bathrooms to writing books on the subject. When did that start? Obviously it's a natural progression for most professors to put what they're what their passion, what they're learning about into written form. But how did that happen for you? When did you decide, okay, you know what, it's time?
Because like actually writing for the public is not something that most professors do, and it used to really be looked down upon. When I got to Colorado,
why was it looked down upon? I'm not aware
a
of
true
this. Help me out.
scientist does not deem to discuss things with the public. I mean, that was the old view.
Really?
I swear to God.
We want to keep it all in-house?
Or it's just
we want
why?
to discuss it amongst ourselves? Yeah. We want to write papers instead of books?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't understand.
You should spend your time, in the pure realm of knowledge. Like, trying to bring this down the mountain is just like, why waste your time? And that's the old view. It's not the view anymore.
Come on.
I swear to God.
I can't believe that's what. So basically, when you were coming up and becoming a professor, this was the sort of the climate. This was. And then what? It gradually changed, and you were like, okay, maybe this is not so taboo what I'm about to do.
Well, I always wanted to do it. I was doing it like for in Boulder. I was writing for the school paper or the town paper, doing little things.
So you were a writer to begin with. This was not a transition for you. This is just an extension.
My parents were both writers, so I kind of grew up in that milieu. But yeah, one of my professors and one of my favorite professors in college, I remember sitting down and talking. I was going to ask him some, math physics questions. And I started talking about Carl Sagan, and he rolled his eyes like, "Oh, Sagan. Oh,
Really?
Yeah. I was really bummed out because I loved the guy, the professor. I really thought he was a cool guy. And I'm like, and I couldn't understand why. That's when I learned. You know what happened? You know what changed it? Because in the old days, when I was coming up, the funding there was the Cold War. So that everybody knew, of course, science is going to get funded because it leads to that's how we beat the Russians. And then that ended and the money started to dry up for science. And then suddenly the idea of going out and explaining to people why they should fund science became important. So, the attitude's totally changed now. Lots of young people want to do it. It's totally cool. But yeah, when I was coming up, it was just looked down upon.
For you, Danny, I would imagine it's similar in the acting where people weren't doing TV for a while, and then all of a sudden now everybody's doing TV because that's where...
Yeah, it's actually very parallel. It was like, oh, TV, oh, television. Yeah, it was the same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Literally the same thing. And all of a sudden, they
right.
stopped making movies, and it became reality, because it became too expensive to make films, and it became, this was around 2000, late 90s to early 2000, and the independent film world had dried up, and they weren't making expensive movies anymore, and reality became a huge hit. So scripted television became scripted stuff became less and less, and all of a sudden, television, I can't wait to do a television show. And then eventually it turned into well, now television is outstanding.
Right, prestige television.
Some of the television is just incredible.
Yeah,
incredible.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So it's all evened out. I mean, it's all changed. But back to you.
Yeah, look, let me ask you this, Adam. So you just mentioned one of your favorite professors. If we sat down with your students and asked them what kind of professor you were, what kind of answer would they give us, and would it differ from
quiet,
your own perception?
Introverted,
they would
boring.
It would depend on what grade they got. But the most obvious determination: did they get an A or did they get a C? And then they'll tell you what they think of me.
What about aliens? How many people started coming up to you and going, what do you think? What about now? Like in the last, I would say, 18 months, 2 years. I mean, obviously you saw an influx of interest and wanting your expert opinion because you're an expert.
Right.
You have a base of knowledge and facts to come from when you're looking at this. And I guess what I'm interested in is your first impression of the interest and the focus on this that was really has not been as prevalent as it is in the last 2 years. It's a long ass fucking question. Sorry.
Well, here's my long ass answer.
Please.
So I've been interested in life in the universe, but what's called astrobiology, right? Which is the study of life.
Okay, let's label it correctly. We are talking about astrobiology.
Right. Understand. And what I'm showing in the book is like this field went through this huge revolution. Like when I was coming up, when I was in graduate school in the late 80s, there was really no astrobiology. There was, there was not a lot of science to be done. And then in 95, these revolutions happened. We discovered that every star in the sky has planets orbiting it. We started really unpacking the history of life on Earth, going back 4 freaking billion years. So suddenly there was a science to do. And so like in the early 2000s, I turned my career to start looking at that. So when the UFO stuff happened, and the UFO stuff, really, we're talking about 2017. That's when the New York Times publishes that, that's when everything blew up. On the front page of the New York Times, government has UFO program, right? And there were those.
What was your first impression?
I was like everybody else. I was like, what the fuck? What is this? And it had the 3 videos, right? You're looking at the videos and you're like, what is that? So, and of course.
And just for our listeners, this was all Navy pilots
right.
that specifically had the videos that captured.
Right. There were those 3, and the people, so like the story for me starts as being like, whoa, is like everybody else, is this for real? And then as time goes on and I learn more, I start getting, my skepticism comes in. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? What are these stories coming from? And as I, dug into it more, the thing that really launched me into in terms of the public, because I'd already been doing lots of stuff for the public, but it wasn't necessarily about, I never really talked about UFOs because I didn't want to get into UFOs. It was too, wackadoodle. Mm-hmm. But then I wrote a New York Times op-ed called, that was titled, I'm a physicist who studies alien life. UFOs don't impress me. And that went viral. That New York Times op-ed went viral. And all of a sudden I'm on CNN, every 2 weeks. Every time one of these hearings happens, people are calling me. And the thing I want to say is like, I am definitely open-minded.
It's your thing now.
It's my thing now. Yeah, right. Whether you want it or not, guess what?
There you go.
But it's cool because like, look, I get why everybody's interested in this. Like, of course I'm interested in this. If UFOs turned out to be alien spacecraft, I'm like all in. That would be the most awesome thing ever. My only question is, are we alone? I don't give a shit how we find the answer. But that's what I'm trying to do in the book. I'm trying to show people that when you look at the stuff that we have for UFOs and UAPs, it just does not come up to the standards that like I'm going to be required to follow. If I say with my telescope, with the James Webb Space Telescope, I found alien life on an alien planet. Just because it's UFOs doesn't mean they get a different standard of evidence, right? Scientists, we're mean to each other. We're brutal. I mean, literally, we're brutal to each other about like, oh, I've got some evidence and I want to make a claim about that evidence. And,
prove it.
Right, exactly.
Scientist, prove it.
Prove it. And here's not just prove it, but you got to stand up in front of a room with like 50 of the smartest guys and women in the world
and then prove it.
Who are going to shred your ass on every point on it, and that's how we learn things. That's why that's why my cell phone works. That's why your aunt's hip replacement surgery didn't kill her. That's how science works.
Yeah, how we're talking right now, right?
Exactly. Look at this crazy machine. You and I, we're having a video call, right? When I was growing up, video calls were like, in the future, people will have video calls.
Yes.
Right? And now we're just like, oh yeah, what the fuck?
It's the whole Dick Tracy thing, right? Never.
Look at this. My wife called me. Right.
I know.
My wife called me before and I'm like, cop cars on 3rd Street. It's just crazy. So the UFO stuff, even now, that's what I'm trying to show, that even now, like those videos actually are not a big deal, right? Like one of the videos that showed.
Why are they not a big deal? What makes you think they're not a big deal? Because obviously you've had now ample opportunity to break those down or look at it, and more information has come in, more has been revealed about it. So how come? Why aren't they?
All right, so take for example, like the way the UFO, the one of them, the Tic Tac or whatever it's called, like rotates really quickly. Oh my God, how is it rotating? And then a guy, Mick West, who kind of took it on himself, sort of like, started doing experiments with various kinds of cameras of the kind that are mounted in the wing. And what you find is those cameras rotate, right? They're meant to like lock onto a subject and they'll rotate in order to keep the best view of the thing. So when you see the thing rotate, that's not the ship, the UFO rotating. That's the camera rotating, right?
It's a camera.
Well, and I believe there was one where they also pointed out that they broke down what the speed of it actually was, and it was only something like 40-something miles per hour.
Because people were all like, look at this. This thing is traveling at impossible speeds, skimming right over the surface of the ocean. And the guy, literally the scientist at the NASA panel, looked at the numbers on the video and then did like trigonometry and said like, no, this thing's at 30,000 feet and it's moving at, 40 miles. It's a balloon. That's the speed of the winds. So
in terms of this, how have you? I mean, obviously, misinformation as fact travels so much faster now. I mean, it's kind of incredible. Yeah. It really is. And
I know. Imagine if Roswell happened today. Imagine that.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, that's why I had the Roswell chapter.
For our younger listeners, can you talk a little bit about what Roswell was and what it is and what ended up happening and what the information, what the data is? Just because they don't know, and it's such a there was a TV show and they have a sense of it, but it would just be posterity, please.
Yeah. Before I go there, I just want to say one thing is that so what you get with UFOs, because I just want to finish this part up.
Yeah, please.
You get the fuzzy blob photographs and you get a lot of personal testimony. And I'm never going to say to somebody that you didn't see what you saw because I wasn't there. And I'm really happy that the pilots are definitely seeing some stuff that for them is very freaky, right? And it's great that the pilots are able to now come out without, because enough pilots are seeing enough stuff that it should be investigated. Doesn't mean anything has to do with aliens. But, most likely from my point of view, it's a national defense thing. It's drones or, purposely spoofing something that can be seen. So you turn on your super sophisticated radars. So I just want to say that, I'm all for an open, transparent, scientific investigation of UFOs and UAPs. And let's see where it leads, right? And so I just want to make that clear to people.
Yes, but that takes away the mystery of it.
Exactly,
doesn't it?
Right.
Doesn't
right.
it, Professor?
And that's what everybody wants is the ghost story kind of thing where the hair on the back of the neck, right?
But I also remember seeing a news program once where they had volunteers come in and they had people walk into the room. And then after those people left the room, they would ask them questions. What color shirt were they wearing? What color hair? And very seldom was the information accurate because we remember things how we want to remember them sometimes.
Memory is not a record. That's the way to think of it. Memory is not like a photograph. It's not an accurate record. It completely changes. And, again, that's why I think the pilots. So, I've had a number of discussions with Ryan Graves, one of the Navy pilots, and I really like him because he's saying look, this is what I saw. It was behaving. What I saw wasn't, acting like any aircraft I ever knew. But I don't, I don't know what it was. You guys go study it. I'm not saying it's aliens. I'm saying this is what I saw. So I think those guys are being honest. But again, as he recognizes memory, personal testimony is the worst form of evidence, right, for anything. So, all right. So we go to Roswell, the shitstorm that is Roswell.
Please.
Let's do Roswell.
1947, June, the first mass UFO sighting, the first UFO sighting happens that goes kind of viral, right? It's this guy, Kenneth Arnold is his name, and he sees 9 lights. He's flying an airplane over Washington, in Washington State. And that it makes headlines. Suddenly everybody's seeing flying saucers. So a month later, this guy is in Roswell. He works on this ranch. And he's out there and he finds a bunch of debris and it's sticks and rubber and wiring. And he finds it on the ground on the ranch and he kind of kicks it aside. And then he heads into town for the first time in a month. And because he doesn't have a radio on, where he's at. And then he starts hearing people talking about these UFOs. It's only a month later, right? And he thinks maybe this has something to do with the UFO, the flying saucer craze. So he talks to the sheriff, who talks to the local Army Air Force Base guy, and they send a guy out who looks at the debris, comes back, and the guy puts out a story that says, we found a flying saucer, right? And that goes in the local paper. That's as far as it gets in the local paper. The next day, the Army is the higher ups are like, what the fuck? No, we didn't find that. So the story gets retracted, right? Literally, that's the end of the goddamn story. For 30 years,
Wow.
nobody hears about Roswell except Roswellians, right, who live there. And then a UFO researcher somehow contacts the Army Air Force guy, who went out there and it's 30 years later, right? This guy's older. You look at his history. He had a penchant for telling tales, about what a great guy, what an important guy was. So he tells this story about like, oh, we found a flying saucer. There were bodies, blah, blah, blah. Where does it go? Where does this story get published? The National Enquirer. For people who remember that the National Enquirer was like the place to go for like ridiculous, lizard boy stories. It gets picked up. Oh, no. What happens then next is I think somebody writes a book. These two guys who are famous for writing like Bermuda Triangle books that are less than scientifically accurate, write a book called Roswell or whatever. I'm sure, and that book goes bestseller, right? And so now what's happening is, the circus has pulled into town, and what's going to happen is there's going to be book after book after book, each one making the story inflates. Like, oh, there was a spaceship that, here's the story. The UFO crashed because it got hit by lightning. Are you kidding me?
It's the telephone game, like when we're kids. It just keeps getting the story slightly changing.
It gets more. And then there's two UFOs. The next book, 2 UFOs that got crashed. The next book, oh, there were bodies that were corrupted. And it goes on, and it builds. In the mid 90s, I don't know if you remember this, it was called Alien Autopsy. It was a documentary.
Sure, absolutely.
With Will Riker.
I was a sucker. I watched it.
Yeah, right. Will Riker from Star Trek The Next Generation. I was like, Will, I thought you had integrity. That thing was so popular.
We don't have integrity. Just as a people. As a people. Yeah. I speak,
Thank you for letting me
I speak
know
for all of us.
And to touch on that integrity, if you go to Roswell now, there's like UFO-shaped diners, and so capitalism steps in and makes it thing as well.
There's money to be made.
Yeah. And here's the amazing thing, Danny, in the book, Adam, if you can talk to this, is that the whole idea of a flying saucer is all fudged as well. There was no saucer.
There was no saucer. So yeah, right. So this is the best part of the story. So go back all the way to that first sighting by Kenneth Arnold. He's flying his airplane, going from Washington to Oregon, and he sees these like 9 lights in the sky, and they're behaving in ways he's really, astounded. He doesn't know what they are. He lands. He's talking to people. A reporter comes over. And he tells the story to the reporter. But here's what he says. He says, I saw these 9 lights in the sky. They kind of looked like crescents, kind of like the ninja things that Batman throws, kind of like Batwing things. And he says they were moving as if when you take a saucer and skip it across the water. That's how they were moving, like, kind of dipping in and out. The reporter misquotes him. It's the greatest misquote in the history of journalism. The reporter says, oh, he saw flying saucers. That's what gets published.
Amazing.
Within like a month. The whole world is seeing flying saucers. But the guy didn't see flying saucers. He saw flying crescents. So it just shows you the power of story and the power, like telephone, like you said.
So let me ask you this, Adam. If I went to prepare for our conversation, I went down the rabbit hole deep online. And what a lot of people are talking about now is that all this government hubbub and disclosing of information is because they're priming us for something in the future. Have you heard this theory? And what are your thoughts on the idea that we're getting more because there's a big reveal coming?
They have been saying that for so long. So when that 2017 thing happened, released, the guy from Blink 187, what's his name?
Blink 182.
Does that show how old I am? Yeah,
no.
Those kids. Those kids with their rock and roll music. I don't know.
187, you're dead. It's murder. You're murdered, actually, 187.
So, he and a few other guys had formed this corporation that was called To the Stars Academy. And they had a press conference where they're like, we're about to reveal the alien metals, built out from the ship. That's like what? It's 2023. Where are they? I mean, it's just the whole history of this. That's what I'm trying to, I go through that in the book, is people saying like government's hiding things we're about to reveal. I literally put money down on the table that says like in 5 years, we are in the exact same place we are now with a bunch of, this guy says that guy knew, that this guy saw, that, nothing's going to happen.
I have a friend who works in the government, not in anything related to UAPs and stuff like that. But he says if there was a big secret in the government, like UFOs, there was no way that it would be kept secret because he said government people chit chat more than anybody else.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that, right, there's this a conspiracy this tight for 50 or 70 years. Come on. No secret has ever been held that, So it's just like, but, listen, look, do the hearings, open it up. I'm all for it. But I will, like I said, I'm putting money down. What I'm sure of is that the telescopes that I and my colleagues use to look for alien life on alien planets, which is where they freaking live, and we're going to find data long before. We're going to have like really important, useful things to say way before these guys ever get past out of their hall of mirrors.
Is that going to be in our lifetimes? Do you think or hope?
Yeah, I think it will be. I mean, the James Webb Space Telescope. All right, so let's just step back for a second. How are we going to find it? Right, this is the revolution that we couldn't do this 20 years ago. So, in 1995, we discovered that the universe is full of planets. Every star has a family of planets orbiting it. As the time goes on, we start developing new and better methods for looking at these planets. And by the mid 2000s, about 10, 15 years ago, we start developing a way of the way we discover planets now mostly is if a planet's orbiting a star, and the orbit is aligned so that every now and then the planet passes between us and the star, then that means it's like a little mini eclipse. A little bit of the starlight gets blotted out. But if the planet has an atmosphere, like a veil of gases around it, then some of the starlight passes through the atmosphere and gets to us. And when it passes through the alien atmosphere, some of the light gets absorbed, and it leaves a fingerprint of whatever is in the atmosphere: carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen. And there are certain kinds of chemicals that will only be in the atmosphere if life puts them there. For example, fucking oxygen, right? Take a deep breath.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All that oxygen in the atmosphere is only there because life put it there. It's all the photosynthesis, all the leaves and plants and plankton.
So if you went to Mars, Adam, and you broke down some of the rock there would be none of those elements even in there. There's no oxygen left behind anywhere.
There'd be so little. Well, really what we're talking about is the air. It's the air right now. So example, if all life on Earth died tomorrow, the 21% of the atmosphere that's oxygen, all that oxygen would get bound up in rocks really quickly. And we'd have an atmosphere that was, if you landed on Earth 2.5 billion years ago, there was life already, but if you stepped out of your spaceship, you're dead. There was no oxygen. You couldn't breathe. Life put the oxygen in the atmosphere. So if you were to look at an alien planet, and with the way I'm talking about, analyze the light passing through the atmosphere, you see oxygen, you found life. You found what we call a biosignature, right? A signature in the atmosphere that planet hosts a biosphere, a shitload of life. You can do the same thing for technology and civilizations. You can look for example in the light from a planet. You can look for evidence of like artificial illumination on the night side, right? Whether or not their cities are lit up. You can look for industrial chemicals like chlorofluorocarbons, the shit that burned up the ozone, right? You can look for solar panels. If they're really using a lot of solar panels, that is actually, there's going to be in the reflected starlight, you're actually going to be able to see the fact that those solar panels are there.
And how new is this technology, Adam? Like how long have you been able to do this?
Yesterday.
Wow. So really, that's really where all the focus and energy and financing should be going.
And that's where it is. I mean, fine. So here's the thing. When I was a graduate student, there was no astrobiology. There was no funding for it. Nobody thought there was anything to do. There was no, now, right now, the next big telescope after the James Webb Space Telescope, the one that we're thinking about building now and is going to cost billions of dollars, we're calling it the Habitable Worlds Observatory. So that shows you that NASA is all in. We are all in. The astronomical community says that finding life in the universe is our number one most important question. And that's what I want people to understand. That's why I wrote the book. It's like, holy shit, we are doing it. Like, suit up, man. The journey, the most important journey we've ever taken, we're starting right now.
Are there other countries that are also in play doing this and making it a priority?
Yeah, the European space, everything NASA does it does in conjunction with its partners, its internet, because it's so expensive. I mean, we foot most of the bill because we have the biggest budget for science. But like the Europeans, the EU has a pretty big space budget as well, so they're totally working on it. They got their own satellites also that are looking for it. Canada plays a big role with us in doing this, so it's Japan. It's an international activity.
It's a lot of places to look. I mean, when you think about galaxies and stars and planets and all of that, I mean, the numbers are boggling, aren't they?
The numbers are boggling. And here's the thing: people have this weird idea. So the first way we tried to do this was SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, which was the radio telescope, with somebody. So that started, Frank Drake, super brave astronomer, back in 1960. He was the first guy who turned a radio telescope to some sun-like stars and tried to listen for signals, So people sort of feel like,
but that's still going too, Adam, right? That's still part of it.
That is part of it. So now it's a kind of a sub part, because that was the only way we could do it in the old days. And people have this weird idea that we've searched the whole night sky and we never heard any signals. But as I show in the book, what the fact is, that kind of SETI was marginal. Like, there was only a few scientists doing it. There was no money for it. So we have, as I talk about, if you add up all the SETI searching that's ever been done, and you compare it to if the sky was the ocean, how much of the ocean have we searched? And it turns out it's a hot tub. It's a hot tub worth of water that we've looked. So, you look at a hot tub.
Can I quote you on that?
Yeah. No, that's a firm result. So it's like, we haven't looked. And now finally, not only do we have the funding to finally look, we have a new way to look, right? Because the whole thing with SETI the traditional SETI required that they were sending you a message, right? Somebody had to build a lighthouse and send you a message, which is I don't know if they're going to do that. Maybe nobody wants to do that. The way we're doing it now is we're like detectives, and we're sitting in our cars, with our shitty cups of coffee and our donuts, and we're just watching these planets. We don't need them to care about us. We're just watching them going about their business. And so that's totally new. That's the new technology. That's why now we're going to be able to, hopefully find evidence one way or the other of whether or not there's life out there.
And so first you watch the star, you wait for the exoplanets to pass in front, and you decide which ones could be habitable based on how far away they are from the star and how much energy that star is giving off.
Yeah, so there's something called the habitable zone.
So you don't waste time looking at the Plutos of the
exactly
universe.
Right. We can tell. So that's the thing. That's what's changed. Like when Frank Drake did his radio telescope thing in 1960, nobody knew whether there were any planets. The 8 planets in our solar system, and don't start with me about Pluto, please. The 8 planets in our solar system. That was it. That's all anybody knew. It could have been that planets were really hard to make. Maybe they were we were the only planets in the universe. So Frank Drake didn't know where to look. Now, not only do we know that every star in the sky has planets, we can see whether the planet's in the right place as it orbits its star for life to form. And what we mean by that is we're pretty sure that liquid water is really important, And so if the planet's too close to the star, it just fries everything. There's no liquid water. If it's too far away, everything's frozen. So we call the zone of orbits where you can have the temperatures just right, the Goldilocks zone.
I was going to say the Goldilocks.
Yeah, that's what they call it.
The Goldilocks distance, right?
Right. And so now we have found many Goldilocks or habitable zone planets, and that's what we're zooming in on.
This brings us to the a listener question that I have for you. Donnie S asks,
which I think is awesome. I love this question. I wanted to know this really.
Why are all planets spherical regardless of what they're made out of, Professor?
That is an excellent question. That is a deep question about planetary dynamics. It's because of gravity, right? Gravity sucks basically when you get enough stuff together, you get a little bunch of rocks floating around in space with lots of other rocks around. Once you get enough of these rocks together, their gravity starts pulling everything in, right? And it pulls it in a spherically symmetric way. Anything around gets tugged in. So things crash down onto this pile. The pile of rocks grows and grows and grows. Its gravity gets bigger. It kind of hoovers up everything, and it all gets smashed down And because gravity is uniform, right? It's, gravity doesn't have a direction. It doesn't care about left or right. There's just like down. So everything smashes together and it ends up making a spherical shape, not a soup can shape or anything else. It makes the most symmetric shape that's possible, which is a sphere.
I know I'm gonna say this every time. I could have just kept talking to the guy but like literally, I wanted to go. Okay, so Close Encounters. What do you buy? What don't you buy? E.T. What do you buy? What don't you buy? What is closest? Like, I just wanted to ask him like stupid, run of the mill, pedestrian, alien science fiction questions because he was so fun to talk about it and he was interested in it. And no question was too small, which is great.
You could tell that he is all in on his love for the cosmos and life on other planets. And even though he doesn't necessarily believe that life on other planets is visiting here, he is more than willing to still talk about it and break it down.
But he's not convinced that it's not. He's just there's just many of the stories that he's found scientific evidence that it's most likely not.
I love this idea, right? That an alien visited us, went back, talked to an alien journalist. They said, "What do these creatures look like?" And he drew a stick figure, or he or she, or drew a stick figure of a human. And now every alien just pictures humans to be stick figures, just like we picture flying saucers.
That's very funny. I look forward to the comments on this one. So I just want to say to everyone again and each week, really, thanks for listening.
Music by Denny Nucci. Produced and edited by the same two people you heard hosting this show because they have no friends.